I got way too excited with an online estate sale and paid $350 for this dresser.
Say what?
I didn't think it was in this bad a shape. The top is pretty rough. Lots of water stains. It's bubbled up from where it got under the veneer. And you can see all the other stains on top. The drawers are in great shape. That's really what won me over. I mean, those walnut drawer pulls are absolutely gorgeous, but I have some work ahead of me. All right, this thing is pretty dirty, so I am going to just start. I have water and dish detergent in a bucket, and I'm going to start with cleaning it, get all this dirt and muck off, and then I will switch to figuring out what I'm going to do with this top, because whether or not I can get these scratches and raised areas out will depend on what I do with the rest of it. So here we go. So the method I've seen, this is my biggest bubble here, is someone actually like cutting into the veneer so it, you know, kind of creates holes, access to the moisture that got trapped underneath. So I'm gonna try that. I'm hoping, you know, as it closes, it will then bring that veneer together. But I don't know, we'll see. I honestly can't get too much worse than it already is. So my damp rag. Oh, hold on, I'm gonna get this area too, because I think I can kind of cover it all with one little press down. But damp cotton t-shirt, hot iron, and then I'm just gonna seam it. See what this looks like. Oh my goodness. It totally went down. It is not perfect, but it definitely went down. That is crazy. All right, I'm gonna keep working at this and doing this. Apparently I had some paint on there. Did not know that. All right, that side does not have paint. Serious steam. All right, that doesn't look quite as flat now. It's funny how the fibers from underneath like seem like they're coming out. I'll keep working on it. I'll probably cut some more holes, I guess. Well, you guys, I worked at this for a while. I made lots more cuts, hit it with the iron, and just kept repeating that, trying to get that flat. But unfortunately, it just didn't work out. You know, I was needing this to work out so I could hopefully restore the entire piece and restain the top along with the drawers. But, you know, things don't always go as planned. I tried, but it just didn't happen the way I hoped. I did make one last ditch effort to try to flatten it out. I used a piece of plywood and then some 25-pound dumbbells to put it on there and see if it might flatten it out, but not a big shocker. It did not work, but I tried. So on to sanding the top. I am working on the bubbled up areas at first. You can see it's going through the veneer. And here I'm using my Surf Prep sander. It's with a 120 grit, and it's going through there really well, but that particle board that is revealed underneath, it's gonna give me some issues because it's a little bit harder with that textured surface to get it smooth with the rest of the top. There are lots of raised places and scratches along the top of this, so I'm just kind of picking the raised surfaces first to work on and then making my way around. And as I sand, I'll give it a feel once over with my hand just to see if I can feel any surface issues, and then stay focused there if I need to, or move on to another area. Usually paint will then again reveal later parts that I miss, but this is at least a good start. So since I will be staining these drawers, I am going to remove them. I'm going to use some painter's tape to label top left, middle left, etc. And that way I can finish working on the rest of this and start to prime. And I'll need to fill all these scratches and plenty of repair, but then I'll start to prime and all that. I decided to switch over to my orbital because it just goes faster. I'm using 120 grit, and I'm going over the entire surface to get rid of all that finish since it's so old. I'm working at a 10 times speed on this recording, so it gives you an idea of really how long it took me. It worked pretty fast, but if only I could actually work this fast. Sanding would go so much faster. Now that I'm finished with sanding, it is time to do repairs. I'm using Bondo, which is a 2-part epoxy filler. You have the gray putty that is in the big canister, and then you see that white tube. It has the blue hardening agent, and I add that to the putty. And once you mix that together, it starts to harden pretty quickly, and I'll just work in patches. Here on those larger spots that I had to sand down, you can see that it's a little bit darker. This is where I've added shellac, and that's to help act as a barrier against, it wanting to swell some more with any of the products that I use. It takes usually only about 15 to 20 minutes for it to fully cure and be ready to sand, and so I'm just taking my orbital sander. You can use 120 grit, 180 grit, 220. 220 will work a little bit slower, but you get a little bit smoother surface, so just kind of pick your poison, what you want to work with, and then sand it all down smooth. After all that sanding, I will go over the top with a damp rag most of the time. I just find that it gets most of the dust up than would a dry rag. Dry rag can kind of throw it around in the air, and this just, I find, picks it up really well. You can use a tack cloth too, but I only use that like right before I'm going to paint, and I don't even use that sometimes just because I don't like how sticky it is and how it gets on your hands, but it does work well. This gives you a good shot of just how much dust was on there. Okay, it's finally time to prime. I find this to be the exciting part where I'm finally getting to put some paint on the furniture piece and just feel like you're making progress. For my sprayer, I am just making passes that overlap by about 50%, and you can see it's getting really great coverage. I do have this sped up to 2 times the speed, but it's still a really fast process with the sprayer, and you get such a great finish. I got my top coat everywhere, or my primer everywhere. It has really great coverage. This is Melange Paints primer. It's in gray because I'm going to go dark, but I just went back and forth like this. I feel like it's easier to go on like the shorter edge versus like going all the way down and then all the way back, but to each their own. So it's looking pretty good. I'm gonna let this dry. I'm gonna run to Costco with the kids and maybe I can get another coat on for later. All right, so after priming is a great time to look over your piece. I can see some areas that, you know, I'll still need to fill, all these little scratches and whatnot. I have a putty that I really like that works really well for these areas. And one thing I've noticed, I'm gonna have to be careful since there's so much grain in this, is that I don't want to overfill, and then you can, like, you know, see where there's a spot where there's missing grain. I'm gonna kind of have that here where I've sanded down. I mean, this is gonna have to be fixed some more too. That's where the particle board was showing, so that's gonna require some work. But I imagine it'll be fill it, sand it, paint it, fill it again. It's probably gonna be a couple rounds, but I'll do my best. And then you can see here where there's that line basically, or, you know, mounding. So, you know, still learning. And I have seen somebody, you know, take like a fine tool and try to recreate a little bit of grain look. So I might try that. But this is just where we are in the process. So the more I looked at the top, the more I decided I did not like the look of the grain, and then also where I was going to have all these repaired spots that weren't going to have grain. So I decided to go in with the Bondo putty. It's a glazing putty, and just fill in all of that grain. There are grain fillers that you can purchase, but this is what I had on hand, and it's pretty easy to work with. It did take me about 45 minutes though, so it was a lot of work, and my hand got tired, but I got it done, and it filled it pretty well. After it was all dry, which really only takes about 25 minutes for this putty to dry, so one part was dry by the time I finished everything. I'm just taking my orbital sander and sanding it all back down smooth so I can get to painting. So I chose a green that I thought had some really cool mid-century vibes going with it. I'd bought it a couple months prior and thought this would be a really great project for it. It's a milk paint by General Finishes. It went on really, really well, but I'll actually end up having some issues with it. I guess I should say I thought it was going on well. You see, I'm picking a few little things I find in the paint as I go, and then just lightly spraying back over that section so it fills in. But you know, you can see it goes on with really great coverage, but I don't know if the problem is just me not being able to figure out the right settings on my sprayer, because, you know, as someone that I follow who does amazing work, you know, this is the paint she uses, so you know, maybe I have a learning curve there, but it does not work out for me. On it, so starting to sand a little bit here. See, this is still not flat, so I'm gonna have to work on that. I'll probably have to get my orbital for that. And you know, there's some bumps and things here that I didn't quite get right, but besides that, it's looking pretty good for that first coat of paint. Here I have sanded down all those areas that were rough or raised, and then I'm filling in places that I've missed with grain from that first go around. I'll sand all this down smooth and wipe it down and get ready for the second coat of paint. So I am not sure why, but there are a ton of bumps all along this. I mean, you could see a little bit there where I need to fill in some more grain, but there are a lot of bumps. So I thought I wiped it down well after sanding, but it's just all over. But I am going, I mean, you can even kind of see it better there. I'm gonna sand it down really well, wipe it down my usual way, and then also use a tack cloth, because this is terrible. Since the bumps were so prevalent and pretty thick, I'm going over the entire surface with my orbital sander. I'm using a 220 grit to make it really smooth. And then after I'm finished sanding everything, I'm going over it with a damp microfiber cloth and then a tack cloth to make sure I get up every little bit of any dust or dirt that's on the surface, just in case it was my fault in the beginning. Well, even after all that additional care for prep work, I have the same thing happen. So I'm going to switch gears and use a paint that I know works really well. So this spot has continued to be a problem for me. I'm going to hopefully be able to fill in some of these holes after I've sanded, and it will just get smoothed out once it dries, and I'll use probably like a 320 sanding block to hopefully just take off as little as possible and keep it smooth, because when paint's getting on here, you can just really notice the bumps and everything in this area, and it just doesn't look good. Okay, that's feeling a lot better, so I think I'm going to still spray it with shellac real fast to kind of seal it in there, so since the paint is water-based, it won't absorb into the wood at all. Hear my kids in the background playing basketball, but I know, I'm crossing my fingers that this will be a lot better. It's wet, but it is looking so much better. I don't know what was going on with that paint. Kind of disappointing, but once I got a second layer of paint on the dresser, it was time to move to the drawers. So I started out by removing the pools so I could sand the fronts completely down. And then you can see in the bottom right there, I'm just using my foam sanding pad to get the drawer pulls all sanded up. And I don't do a complete sand of the drawer pulls because the gel stain goes over that nicely. After all the prep for the drawers, it's time to repair the areas that are damaged. So I'm just using this epoxy filler. It's nice because it has a wood tone to it already. So when you're trying to match it to your stain, it will be a lot easier to do so. So it's two-part. You just break off what you need and start mixing it together. I've heard this called adult Play-Doh, which is a pretty true statement. And just get it all mixed up and then form it in the areas that you're wanting to fill. And then it has, I believe, a 30-minute time before you can start sanding, but I did give it a little bit longer just to be on the safe side. final step before staining is to get all that dust off. You don't want any of that going into your stain. And so I'm just using a damp rag again because I find that to be the most effective outside of a tack cloth. And can we also take a moment just to appreciate that beautiful wood grain? Before applying stain, I like to use a wood conditioner. This really helps with making your stain uniform when you apply. So I'm using an oil-based stain, so I'm using an oil-based wood conditioner. This is by Minwax, and you just put it on there. I always use a foam brush because they're cheap and you can dispose of it once it dries out. And I just put it on the entire surface, and then you want to wait about 15 minutes to wipe back any excess. And then once you have done that, you have 2 hours to apply your stain. So that gives you plenty of time, but just something to note if you are planning out your time and your project. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just using a disposable lint-free rag and going over the surface to wipe back any excess. All right, it's time to stain it. I am using walnut gel stain. I used this in my last project and love it. It's really easy to work with. With gel stain, it doesn't penetrate completely into the wood, so it's a friendlier stain to work with. And I'm still learning and early process of flipping furniture, so this has been a great stain with which to work, and I really love the results that I've gotten from it so far. The can says that you have a few minutes to let it sit on there before you wipe back the excess, so I'm just doing a couple drawers at a time and then going back to the previous drawer to wipe it back down. Okay, they are still drying. I just finished up all of the drawer fronts, but they're looking pretty good. So I'm going to be working on trying to blend this area to the rest of the drawer front and this little area here that I had to repair. Last night when I was sanding this down a little bit more, it lightened. I don't know why. I even tried putting some stain on it again this morning, and it still just stayed kind of lighter. So I think I'm going to use my blending sticks and see what they look like. But it's just a process of kind of playing. I've already used this one a little bit here, but it's just a process of putting it on there, layering it, looking at it, seeing what you think. And then I can kind of use my finger to feather it into the area that it touches. So that color was True Brown, and this is Dark Walnut, yeah. I'm going a little bit, I'm not covering it fully, and then I can come in and smooth it out a little bit with my finger. That's looking better. I don't know why this isn't really wanting to absorb in there. I wonder if it's the oil from the stain. Maybe should put some sealant on there and then try.
Mom.
Yeah, big guy.
There's a lot near me and Audrey were building a house, like a pretend house, and then it flew.
So I am back to working on this. Really hoping I can get this to layer well. I'm going to try to come in with a marker on this part since it's just not darkening with the blend all stick. I'm gonna go lightly, and then I'll rub with my finger before it dries so it's not so like strong. Maybe it was a little early. Okay, that's better. We want to try to just mainly get these parts that look wider. That's it. It's a little dark. But I can always come in with the blend alls maybe on top of this to get it to look a little bit better. Just very lightly touching it here. I think that might work a little bit better. Let that dry. And then I'm going to come over here and try the same. These areas that are lighter, and honestly this is just a trial and error type thing. Alright, I'm gonna let that dry some, and then I'll come in with my blend all stick and try to make it look a little bit better. Okay, I'm coming back to these spots where I use the marker, and then I'm gonna kind of layer it, hopefully with something that matches a little bit better. So this process, it takes a while, you know, it's just going back and forth with your colors that match to get it to where you want it to. And as you're layering, you also want to seal it as you go along. I learned this later as I had some issues when trying to apply the top coat, but after that, when I was correcting it, I just sprayed it with some shellac. I know that Mohawk has a vinyl sealer that is good for spraying as you go and letting dry, but I just use shellac instead. All right, for top coat, I'm using a brush-on polyurethane. I wish that I had just waited the extra couple of days to get the wipe on because I think that would have been much easier to manage. I struggled with this bubbling up on me, and I did have to sand it down a couple more times than I would have preferred and then fixed it. But overall, I do like how the look of it was when I finished, but I think there's just a learning curve there. And I also would not get an expensive brush like I mistakenly did. Since it's oil-based, it is not the easiest to clean, so I ended up not being able to reuse this brush again. After 3 total layers of top coat, I let that dry to fully cure, and then I'm attaching the drawer pulls. I tried to keep the drawer pulls with the drawer that I took them off of the entire time, so I wouldn't have any frustrations with reattaching it, since there are 4 screws along the entire length, and the process was thankfully very seamless. Almost to the finish line. So one of the last steps I always do is to add Howard's Feed and Wax to the drawers. That just gives the wood a nice fresh look, and it just gives it a really pretty color, and it has a nice scent. Also, don't mind my compression socks. I've had vascular issues since I was a teenager and was having to wear them after a procedure. I also like to put the wax on the drawer glides if they are wooden. That just helps with the drawers to glide in and out as smooth as possible. All right, you ready for the big reveal? Reminder, here's where we started, and here is the final product. You know, I really like how it turned out. I would have loved to have fully restored it, but I love that black. I think it goes really well with the walnut and then the top coat. I love the sheen of it. I think it just really makes that wood grain stand out. As much as it pains me to admit how much I paid for this dresser, I am very happy with how it turned out, and I learned a valuable lesson. It did end up selling for $600 after being listed for about 5 weeks for $650. So really, after supplies and everything, it was maybe $175 to $200 in profit, but I'll move on, learn my lesson, and be on to the next flip. As always, I really appreciate you watching, and if you haven't already hit that subscribe button, I'd love for you to follow along as I'll be bringing you more flips like this.